Дорогие друзья и коллеги, рада приветствовать вас на нашем небольшом интервью с человеком, которого, думаю, не стоит представлять. Это всемирно известный юнгианский аналитик, доктор философии, автор 16 книг, многие из которых переведены на русский язык, доктор Джеймс Холлис. И в преддверии семинара, который состоится 29 января 2022 года, мы встретились с доктором Холлисом, чтобы обсудить несколько вопросов. Dr. Hollis, I have just been telling the audience that you don't have to be told a lot about, but just that you have 16 books. Most of them are translated into Russian. Unfortunately, not all of them. The latest two are not. And my first question is about those two books that you have written for the recent 2 years, Living Between Worlds and Prisons. And what questions do you refer to in those books?
Well, the book Living Between Worlds addresses the fact that from time to time, civilizations and repeatedly individuals will go through experiences where their understanding of self and world, their roadmap, their understanding of their agendas will not be working, will be exhausted, or will be changed by outer events. During those moments, we find ourselves in between, and that happens to cultures, and it happens to individuals repeatedly. And during those times, our first response is regressive. Let me go back and reconstitute the plans and expectations that I had to start with, but they no longer work. So I really can't go back. And we find ourselves caught in between. The first sentence of Dante's famous Inferno is midway in life's journey. I found myself in a dark wood, having lost the way. My early life as an academic was interrupted by having a serious midlife depression. And right at the midway point, at age 35, I entered my first hour of therapy, not knowing that I was really being invited to a whole different kind of journey, and one which led me ultimately to moving out of academia into the world of psychoanalysis. And after that, I had 6 years of study in Zurich, Switzerland, at the Jung Institute there.
Mm-hmm. So this book really, I think it can really answer a lot of questions that people of all over the world are facing during the last 2 years, really.
Exactly, yes. And in fact, in the book Prisms, there's actually it's a book of essays on various subjects. But one of the essays there is on reframing our sense of self and world in times of pandemic, because everyone had to reconsider how my life has changed and how the threat of the invasion of this virus and so forth, how it affects my life. And of course, one of the issues I'm trying to address in both of those books and in all of the books, as Jung put it this way, what supports us when nothing out there supports us? That's a question we all have to address. What supports me when nothing supports me? Because we have to find something within each of us that we can turn to as a point of reference. In 1862, the American poet Emily Dickinson said once, "The sailor cannot see the north, but knows the needle can." And the meaning behind that, I think, was, in times of change, in times of chaos, we need to know we have a compass, because the compass can tell us true north. And if we have true north, then we can, make our way. But if we don't have a compass, we're at the mercy of whatever's happening out there. And that happens to all of us. It happens to cultures from time to time, but to all of us sooner or later in the conduct of our lives, where, again, outer circumstances or inner revolt, as I experienced it, causes us to reframe our whole sense of who I am, what's my understanding, what are my assignments, and to go back to the drawing board and to say, all right, I need to reconfigure my life at this point.
I can say that during the 2 last years in the therapy, in my practice, the question of the inner reference, of new reference, has become very, very important, and every client seeks
Yes.
for this inner reference. Even today, I was working in the morning, and I was talking to my client about this inner reference. Imagine that.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yes, and an additional essay in that book, Prisms, is on the wounded healer, which is going to be my talk with you folks in January. So it's a collection of essays on various topics. And I have another book coming out in January called The Broken Mirror, and it's about the difficulties of self-knowledge and yet the importance of self-knowledge, you see. So there are many topics of interest, I think, to all of us. And I'm simply trying at age 81 and a half to explore as many as I can while I can, you see.
So those 2 years are very fruitful for you.
Yes.
What I have noticed, being a lecturer in a fundamental course for Jungian studies, I see that every year more and more people, young people, students apply for Jungian studies here in Russia. And in 2020, the number of students was at its peak, the biggest amount. What is your opinion about this tendency? Does the new world we are living in needs more psychologists and analysts?
Well, yes and no. I think that it's also a testimony to the limitations of behaviorism and strictly psychological, cognitive psychology and pharmacology, all of which are important. But you can take a person's behaviors, their thought process, and their physiological issues, put it all together, and you still don't have the human being. The fact that there's more and more interest to study Jungian psychology or analytic psychology is a testimony to the importance, really, of meaning. But why am I here? Not just to be a well-adapted person. If my society is ill, my adaptation to that makes me ill. What is my journey about? How is that differing from someone else? What are the sources of my insight into that? What are the things that block me and keep me from stepping into this larger experience of my own soul unfolding here? When I use the word soul, I mean that in the literal translation from the Greek word psyche. It means soul. And psychotherapy from the Greek, psyche therapoion, means the listening to or attending to the soul. And psychopathology means the expression of the suffering of the soul. And the moment you talk about soul, some people just shut off, okay? But what it's really about is what we are, this meaning-seeking, meaning-creating individual. And you know, just being well-adapted or, quote, being successful by the standards of our time and place often separates us from our soul, and great suffering begins to emerge from within because we have to respect the autonomy of the human psyche. Ask a question like, if I'm so consciously conducting my life and it's going so well, why do I have an average of, and sleep research has told us this, an average of 6 dreams per night occurring in my intrapsychic life? I'm not creating them. I don't even remember most of them, but they keep producing each night. So something inside of me is wanting a conversation. Something is commenting on my life. And if, as Jung said metaphorically, there's a 2 million-year-old person inside of each of us, wouldn't it make sense once in a while to stop and have a conversation with the wisdom of nature rather than simply the noisy voices of the culture around us.
Thank you very much. And I fully agree with you. Hello, yes, you can hear me. And my last question, you are an international lecturer and you have students and I suppose maybe even analysts from all over the world. And maybe you have observation about the wounded healer. Does the profile of wounded healer differ from country to country, from culture to culture?
Well, it's fair to say that the archetype of the wounded healer has been evidenced in virtually every culture, suggesting that it is a universal issue. Because as Jung said, it's often the measure of our wounds that allows us to enter into that space with other people and to be able to work with that and to apply what we've learned in that encounter in a helpful way to that person. In the talk on the wounded healer, I want to start and talk about the history of it, but then say, now, what are the characteristics that often are found in the childhood of people in the helping professions, not just therapists, social worker, nurses, physicians, clerics, etc., people who are engaged professionally in the caretaking business, so to speak. What do they have in common? What leads them to this work? And then having said that, and what also sets them up for continued wounding of their own experience, continuously activating. Because as we all know, there's often an enormous burnout that occurs for people in caregiving professions. Our poor nurses and physicians are particularly experiencing that in the hospitals these 2 years. And what is it that sets them up for that? And then I want to address, what are the things we can do to protect ourselves or to heal our own selves in that process so that we don't become victimized by our own history and continuously rendered very vulnerable by the exposure to the toxins that we have to address sometimes hour by hour by hour, day in and day out.
Oh, I can't wait already to have January 29th and to listen to this topic, because me as a psychologist, as analytical psychologist, especially during the last 2 years, I feel this pressure. I feel, though I already had those signs of burnout. And of course, everybody has its own research and points how to avoid it. But I think it is now at this time, it is a very, very important topic for all us, for all my colleagues and medical staff, for doctors, for all caregivers. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to returning in January for further conversation with colleagues in Russia.
Спасибо большое. С нами был доктор Холлис. До встречи 29 января.